What are the woodworking tips I wish somebody had handed me before I turned 40? The ones that would have saved me a decade of ruined boards and wasted money. There are 16 of them, and almost none are about cutting a joint. Most are about the stuff that happens before and around the cut, which is exactly where I was losing without knowing it. I have run a garage shop for more than 25 years, and for a long stretch of it I thought I was just not talented enough. My tops cupped, my stain went blotchy, my best face always seemed to end up torn, and I blamed my hands. It was not my hands. It was that I was buying wood wrong, storing it wrong, and setting up my cuts wrong, and no amount of careful sawing fixes a problem that started 3 steps earlier. Stay with me to the end, because the last tip is a $5 tool that does what a hand plane and a whole stack of sandpaper both fail at. And once I learned it, tear out on figured wood basically stopped being a problem in my shop. And somewhere in the middle is the reason half my early projects had a pale, ugly blotch in the finish that I could never explain, until an old woodworker showed me the 30-second habit that causes it. Start where every project actually starts, which is buying the wood, because this is where most hobbyists lose before they ever make a cut. Tip 1. Buy your rough lumber from a real lumber yard, a hardwood dealer, not the home center. The big box store sells you overpriced, often warped construction pine, and a tiny rack of premium boards that have been sitting in a heated store drying out and twisting. A real hardwood dealer sells you actual species: walnut, cherry, hard maple, white oak, dried correctly to furniture moisture, in real widths, and usually cheaper per board than that sad premium rack. The first time I walked into a proper lumber yard, I felt stupid for all the years I had not. It is the single biggest jump in wood quality and cost you can make, and it costs nothing to start doing. One thing to know walking in: hardwood at a real yard usually comes rough, meaning straight off the saw with a fuzzy surface, or surface 2 sides, called S2S, meaning the 2 flat faces are planed but the edges are still rough. Rough is cheaper, and it is why you eventually want a way to flatten and thickness it yourself, but S2S gets a beginner building without a planer. Rough boards are also sold thicker than you expect. A 1-inch board is called 4/4, written 4/4, and it actually starts a hair over an inch, about the thickness of your thumb, so you have material to flatten down to a true 3/4. Which leads straight into tip 2, because a lumber yard sells wood differently, and you need to speak the language. Learn what a board foot is. It is just how hardwood is priced, and the formula is simple: length in inches, times width in inches, times thickness in inches, divided by 144. That gives you board feet, and the yard charges a price per board foot. Once you can run that math in your head, roughly, you can walk up to any board, know what it should cost, and know instantly whether you are looking at a deal or getting worked over. I have watched beginners way overpay because they had no idea how to price what was in their hands. 2 minutes of math is the difference. Run one example so it sticks. A board 6 inches wide, 1 inch thick, and 8 feet long. 8 feet is 96 inches. So 96 times 6 times 1, divided by 144, comes out to 4 board feet. If the yard is charging $6 a board foot for walnut, that plank is $24. And now you know before you get to the counter. Do that math on a few boards, and you will never again hand over money hoping you got a fair shake. Tip 3 is the one that explains why your tabletop cupped and your buddies stayed flat. Learn the difference between quarter sawn and flat sawn lumber. It comes down to how the log was cut. On a flat sawn board, the growth rings run across the end in long arcs, and it gives you that cathedral, mountain range grain pattern most people picture, and it is cheaper. On a quarter sawn board, the rings run close to straight up and down through the thickness. And here is what matters. Quarter sawn wood moves far less across its width as the seasons change. The Forest Products Laboratory, the Federal Wood Research Lab, has documented that difference for decades. A flat sawn board can move close to a 1/4 inch across a foot of width between a humid summer and a dry winter, about the gap of 2 stacked quarters, while a quarter sawn board of the same species moves roughly half that. That is why quarter sawn belongs in a wide tabletop or a door that has to stay flat. It is not always the answer. It costs more, and you lose that dramatic grain. So for a lot of projects, flat sawn is fine. But knowing which is knowing why your work moved on you. Sit with that for a second. because it reframes a thing most people blame on themselves. When your panel cupped, you probably did not do anything wrong at the bench. The board was going to move, and nobody told you to see it coming. 4 on the list is about how you cut that wood down, and it is the one that took me longest to respect because it feels like doing nothing. Mill your lumber in stages, and let it rest between them. Do not take a rough board and machine it straight to final size in one go. Cut it a little oversize first, maybe an inch long and a 1/4 inch wide beyond your final size. Sticker it, and walk away for a couple of days. Wood holds internal stress from how it grew and how it dried. And the moment you start cutting into it, it moves, it bows, it twists a little as that stress releases. If you mill it to final size right away, it keeps moving after you build, and now your flat part is not flat. Rough it over size, let it settle, then take it to final. That waiting is not laziness. It is the wood telling you what it is going to do, while you can still fix it. I learned this on a walnut tabletop early on. I bought the boards, milled them dead flat and square the same afternoon, glued the top up that evening, proud of myself for the speed. 2 weeks later, that top had a cup across it you could rock a coffee cup on, because the wood was still moving, and I never gave it the chance to do that moving before I locked it together. If I had roughed it over size and let it sit 3 days, it would have shown me its twist while it was still loose boards I could re-flatten. Speed cost me the whole top. Tip 5 keeps that same wood flat while it sits in your shop. Sticker your lumber and store it flat, up off the floor. Stickering just means stacking boards with thin spacers between each one, so air can move around every face evenly. Those spacers only need to be about 3/4 of an inch, the thickness of a fat marker, and set them in line with each other, spaced roughly every 16 inches along the boards, about the length of your forearm, so the stack does not sag between them. A board left leaning in the corner of the garage bends into that lean. A board lying flat on a concrete floor wicks moisture up out of the slab and cups. Throw a little weight on top of the stack, a couple of scrap boards or a sandbag, and it stays even flatter while it settles. A board left leaning in the corner of the garage bends into that lean. A board lying flat on a concrete floor wicks moisture up out of the slab and cups. You paid real money for that lumber, and how you stack it in the week before you use it decides whether it is still straight when you need it. We are about at the halfway mark, and this is the thread running through all of it. Woodworking is not just what you do at the saw. Half the craft is choosing good wood, letting it settle, and setting the cut up right, all before the blade ever spins. Get that front end wrong, and no skill saves you. Get it right, and the building gets a lot easier. 6 is a dead simple habit that stops a maddening mistake. Use the cabinet maker's triangle. When you have your parts laid out together, a set of drawer sides, the boards for a panel, draw one big triangle across all of them at once with a pencil. The point of the triangle tells you which way is up, and the way the lines cross each part tells you the order and orientation. So you can never glue a board in flipped, or with the grain running the wrong way, or a drawer side on backward, because one glance at the triangle tells you exactly how the parts go back together. It is the cheapest insurance in the shop. Before I used it, I glued up a drawer with one side on backward, so the grain jumped the wrong way at a corner, and it was the first thing your eye landed on. Had to cut it apart and remake the side. One pencil triangle would have caught it in a half second. These days I draw the triangle before I do anything else with a set of parts. Tip 7 saves your best face on every single cut, and almost nobody sets up for it. Keep the show face pointed at the side where the saw teeth enter the wood. A saw tears the fibers on the side where the blade exits, so you want the teeth going into your good face, and any tear out landing on the hidden side. In practice, a circular saw and a jigsaw cut, with the teeth coming up through the bottom, so you cut those with the good face down. A table saw and a miter saw cut with the teeth coming down into the top, so you cut those with the good face up. Some woodworkers call it the money side, and the rule is always the same underneath. Teeth into the show face, tear out on the back. The one place it gets fuzzy is a sliding miter saw with the blade doing both, so on those, a sharp fine-tooth blade matters more than the flip. Point the good face the right way, and you stop sanding out blowout you never had to make. And when you cannot flip the piece, when the good face has to be up on a circular saw for some reason, lay a strip of blue painter's tape right over the cut line first. The tape holds the surface fibers down as the blade lifts through them, so they shear instead of splintering. It is not perfect, but it turns an ugly edge into a clean one on the cuts where you are stuck. 8 backs that up, and it is a trick I use constantly now. Put a sacrificial board behind your cut. Tear out and blowout happen right where the blade or the drill bit or the router exits the material. Clamp a scrap of wood tight against that exit side, and the scrap takes the splintering instead of your good piece. It works everywhere. Drilling a hole through a board, put scrap underneath, and the bit punches into the scrap instead of blowing a crater the size of a quarter out the back. Cross-cutting, back up the cut. Routing an edge, back up the corner where the bit exits. The fibers tear out into the sacrifice, and your workpiece stays clean. Tip 9 is a tool care thing that feels like magic when you first do it. Clean your blades and bits. Do not just sharpen them. A saw blade or a router bit builds up a hard brown crust of burnt sap and pitch on the teeth over time, and that gunk makes a perfectly sharp blade cut like a dull one. Burn the wood and bog down. People throw out or resharpen blades that were never dull, they were just filthy. A $10 bottle of blade and bit cleaner from Rockler or CMT, or even some cleaner and an old toothbrush. Scrubs that crust off and the blade cuts like new again. Most guys have never once cleaned a blade in their lives, and it is the cheapest performance you can buy. I nearly threw out a good table saw blade once, convinced it was shot because it was burning every cut and bogging the saw. On a whim, I soaked it flat in a shallow tray of cleaner for 10 minutes and scrubbed the teeth, and the brown crust came off in sheets. That blade cut like the day I bought it. I had been one trash can away from tossing a perfectly good blade because nobody ever told me sap builds up. 10 is in the same family, and it costs about $8. Wax your machine tops and your plane soles with paste wax. A coat of plain paste wax, and you want one with no silicone in it because silicone wrecks your finish later. On your table saw top, your jointer bed, your fence, and the sole of your hand plane, does 2 things. The wood glides across the surface instead of dragging, so your cuts are smoother and safer, and the wax keeps rust off the bare cast iron. In a humid shop, a garage on the Gulf Coast, that rust protection alone is worth it. And out in a dry climate, the glide is still worth it. It is the $8 that makes every tool in the shop feel better to use. Tip 11 is an old-timer move that is nearly forgotten, and it saves you snapped screws. Wax your screw threads before you drive them into hardwood. Drag the threads across a block of beeswax, an old candle stub, even a bar of soap in a pinch. The wax lets the screw drive in far easier. It makes it much less likely to snap off inside a hard wood like oak or maple, and it splits the wood less on the way in. If you have ever sheared the head off a screw buried in a board, you already know why this one matters. I have snapped a screw flush in a white oak leg and spent an hour drilling the hardened stub out around it, all to save the 2 seconds it takes to drag the threads across a candle. A little wax on the threads, and that stops happening. 12, and this is where a lot of good work gets quietly ruined, is about glue. Do not wipe wet glue squeeze out with a rag. Squeeze out is the bead of glue that oozes from a joint when you clamp it, and the instinct is to grab a wet rag and wipe it away clean. That is the mistake. Wiping wet glue smears a thin layer of it deep into the surrounding wood pores, and you cannot see it, but that spot will reject stain and finish and show up later as a pale, ugly blotch that you cannot sand out, right next to your joint. This is the blotch I promised you at the start, the one that haunted my early projects. The fix is patience. Leave the squeeze out alone for about 20 minutes, until the bead turns firm and rubbery like a gummy candy. And then it pops right off cleanly with a chisel or a scraper, and takes nothing into the wood with it. Wet rag bad, rubbery peel good. Tip 13, keeps that finish even across the whole board. 2 things here, because they go together. First, on blotch-prone woods, use a conditioner. Pine, cherry, birch, and soft maple soak up stain unevenly, dark in some spots and light in others, and it looks terrible. A wash coat, or a can of Minwax pre-stain conditioner, about $8. Brushed on first, evens out how thirsty the wood is, so the stain lands uniform. Second, and this catches everyone, do not over-sand before you stain. Sanding past about 180 grit burnishes the surface so smooth that it will not drink the stain in at all, and you get pale, splotchy color. High grits, 220 and up, are for a clear finish where you want that polish. For stain, stop around 150 or 180 and let the wood stay open enough to take the color. Same idea I hid in the sanding video. The finish reveals what the prep did. I ruined a cherry piece learning this. I sanded it to a beautiful glassy 320, proud of how smooth it felt, then wiped on stain, and it came out looking like a cheap sponge painted it. Dark blotches and pale patches, because I had polished the wood shut and never conditioned it. Sanded to 180 with a conditioner first, the next one came out even and rich. Cherry taught me that lesson the expensive way. 14 costs you 30 seconds and saves whole projects. Test your finish on an offcut of the same board before you touch the real piece. Same species, same board, same sanding, same everything. Stain and finish can come out looking completely different from what you pictured in your head or saw on the can, and the color on cherry is nothing like the color on pine. A scrap tells you the truth while you can still change your mind. I have stripped an entire project because I trusted a picture on a can instead of spending 30 seconds on a cutoff. Never again. Tip 15 is the one your lungs will thank you for in 20 years. Respect the fine dust, not just the chips. The sawdust you can see, the chips and shavings, falls to the floor and is mostly harmless. The dust that hurts you is the invisible fine stuff. The particles smaller than you can see, under about 10 microns, which is a fraction the width of a human hair, that hang in the air for hours after you stop and settle deep in your lungs when you breathe. And here is the part people miss. A shop vacuum and a dust collector grab the chips and the coarse stuff. But the finest, most dangerous dust sails right through a cheap filter and stays airborne. That is the dust a mask actually stops. Hardwood dust is classified as a carcinogen by health agencies, and some species like walnut and many exotics are outright irritants that will have you sneezing and worse. A real respirator, a 3M with the right cartridges for about $30, plus some airflow and dust collection, matters more to your long game than any single tool you will ever buy. You cannot unbreathe 20 years of fine dust. Now the last one, the tip I held back, because it is the cheapest tool on this whole list, and it solved a problem I fought for years. Learn to use a card scraper. It is exactly what it sounds like. A thin rectangle of steel, a few dollars, that you hold in both hands and flex slightly and drag across the wood. And here is the part that sounds impossible until you feel it. On figured wood, curly maple, a swirling grain, anything where a hand plane grabs and tears the surface out no matter which way you go, a properly prepared card scraper takes off whisper-thin, tear-out-free shavings, thinner than a sheet of paper, not dust like sandpaper makes, actual clean shavings. It leaves a surface so clean it often needs no sanding at all. The whole secret is in how you sharpen it, and it is not like sharpening anything else. You file and hone the edge square and clean first, and then you take a hard, smooth steel rod, called a burnisher, and you roll a tiny hook over along that edge, a burr so small you can barely feel it. That microscopic hook is what does the cutting. Most people who say a card scraper does not work for them simply never turned a proper burr, so they are dragging a dull piece of flat steel and getting nothing. Learn to turn that hook, and a $5 Baco scraper will outfinish tools that cost 50 times as much on exactly the wood that gives everybody the most trouble. That is a fair warning too, so I am straight with you. The scraper is not a replacement for everything. It is for smoothing and for taming difficult grain, not for hogging off material or truing an edge. And a freshly burnished scraper gets hot fast against your thumbs, so a lot of us push it with a little wooden holder or take short passes. But for the price of a sandwich, it is the tool that finally beat the tear-out I used to fight with sandpaper and swearing. None of these 16 is about being more talented than you already are. They are about buying wood right, letting it settle, setting the cut up so the tear-out lands where nobody looks, keeping your tools clean, and protecting the finish and your lungs. It was never talent. It was the stuff nobody tells you happens around the cut. Pick one this weekend. If you only take one, go clean a blade you were about to throw out, because you will not believe it is the same blade. Next time I want to take one rough board from the lumber yard all the way to a finished panel, milling it in stages the way I described, so you can watch the wood settle and stay flat. Go make some sawdust, and wear your mask while you do it.